And we're back. This is session 3, I do believe. That's coming up today for our day of conversations around building Linux and open source based solutions on Azure. In this particular session, I'm joined by Ross Gardler.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
I think we've met a couple times before in the hallways and stuff like that. But why don't you give our audience a little bit of a background on who you are and what you're going to be talking about?
So as you said, I'm Ross Gardler. Right now I work for Microsoft Open Technologies, but I'm transitioning into the Cloud and Enterprise team to work on Azure and specifically on Linux on Azure. And what I'm going to be talking about today is Docker, though. There's been a few questions already on the Q&A as to are we going to be saying any containers. So here we go. Let's talk about containers.
Container technologies and everything else that goes along with it. And so already I've noticed that you were one of the good people that managed to get their slide decks in a little bit earlier, so they were already available.
Always
Thank
try.
you very much for that.
Very rarely win, but try.
So if you wanted to, on the main page, if you go to the FAQ section, there is near the very, very top of the links to be able to go off and download them. If you're watching this in an on-demand fashion from Microsoft Virtual Academy at some point in the near future, you will also be able to download them as part of the resources that are there. We actually had a question that came up just before starting the session about closed captioning and if there's be closed captioning available. And I do believe that closed captioning takes place when it is available in the on-demand format. We don't have the ability to do it here live, especially because of my Canadian accent and
I was just thinking my English
and your English accent. We kind of screw everything up. So for now, we'll let them see how they come out whilst they get ready for the on-demand section. I'll let you go ahead, man. Go ahead and get started.
All right. So, I'm going to be talking, as we said, about Docker, specifically about managing multiple containers or applications made of multiple containers. So I'm going to do a quick introduction as to what containers are. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail here, just enough for us to get a feeling. So if you're totally new to containers, it'll get you going for the rest of this session. So on the left-hand side here, we have the traditional virtual machine setup. Right down there at the bottom, you have the server, and then you have your host OS as the next layer above there, and then you'll have a hypervisor. And then running on top of that, you have 1, 2, 3, in this case, or more virtual machines. And those virtual machines will bring with them a guest operating system. So you can have a full operating, or you need to have a full operating system running on top of an existing operating system. And then on that, you have all the binaries and libraries that your application needs, and you'll be working, you'll have your application code on top of that. If you have 3 applications, as we do here, you need 3 guest operating systems. You need 3 sets of binaries and libraries that those applications are dependent upon, and then 3 sets of the code that you're going to run. And so even in a situation like this, where we have App A and App A Prime, which is almost identical application, we're still duplicating a lot of contents that we have in that virtual machine, and this makes them quite heavyweight. And so containers work towards one of those, work towards making things lighter. So on the right here is what it looks like when we're running containers. At the very bottom, we have a server. On top of that, we have the host operating system, so that's just the same. And then we have the Docker engine rather than a hypervisor. And it doesn't necessarily need to be Docker. There's other there's other container technologies out there. It's been around for a long time. What we're talking about today is the Docker engine. And what's special about the Docker engine is that really it's made it easy to work with containers. Whilst the technology has existed for a long time, it's been quite difficult. But Docker have created an open source project that makes it much easier to work with. So here we're speaking specifically about the Docker engine. Running on top of the Docker engine, you have your various applications, and you'll see that we have a much higher density running on this same server here. And the reason for that is that the containers don't bring a full operating system with them. They reach down into the host operating system and therefore can be much lighter in terms of what they need to bring with them, much more efficient on resources within the machine. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages to both. People often ask, are containers a replacement for virtual machines? No, they're not. They have their place, and virtual machines have their place. I'm not going to go into the details of exactly what the differences are. There's plenty of material out there on the internet. But what we're going to look at now is what Microsoft are doing with containers. So this is an image taken from the Docker blog when we announced our partnership with Docker to work with containers. And essentially what it's showing is that at some point in the near future, we're going to be able to run microservice-based applications on both Windows and Linux. So what do I mean by microservice-based? Each of these circles is a single part of an application, a containerized application. And each circle could be thought of as a microservice. It does one thing and it does it well. And today, you can only run these containers as Linux containers on top of a Linux operating system. But what we've done with partnering with Docker ecosystem and the open source projects is to commit to bringing containers to Windows as well. So today you can build an application like this where you're only running on Linux, but in the very near future you'll be able to run on Windows as well. Today in these demos I'm going to be showing Linux. So what we're doing in order to make that happen is working with the Docker community. As I've said, we've started to port, in fact we've completed porting the Docker client to Windows, and what this means is regardless of where you're deploying your applications, you can use a Windows or a Linux machine to manage those containers. The next level down is the Docker engine. The Docker engine already runs on Linux perfectly well, and we've demonstrated it running on Windows Server. It'll be in the next release of Windows Server, but we've started demoing that to people, and we showed it working at Build in April. We showed it in DockerCon a month or so ago. And with these two pieces, you'll be able to manage containerized applications regardless of where you're deploying them. And that regardless of where you're deploying them is an important part. Docker is all about portability of applications. And that's what we're working with Docker to deliver. You can deliver your Dockerized applications into your own data center on-premise. You can deliver them off-premise to Azure, to another provider. You can run them on your own laptop in a development environment, etc. So we get maximum portability by providing this level of support. So I've already talked through this slide. There's a little bit more detail about what we're doing with the Docker community in here, some more specific details. There's plenty of information on various blogs at Docker and at Microsoft if you want to dig deeper into that. But we'll be seeing that in practice in a few moments.